It's time to step out now into cosmos, into mythos, into psyche.
In the heart of the sky, planetary movements arise and depart while humans wander this world in relationship to one another, the earth and the heavens. Each life arises from the ancestral gene pool and culminates, returning to source. Wise words from the guest of this show, William Morris, from his book Cycles in Medical Astrology. I'm so happy to share this with you. It was made possible through a listener of the show, and it's great because William and I are into dragons, Chinese medicine, music, naturally, astrology, and he's got 40 years of practice on me, but all of us. Like, he knows what he knows because of what he has seen in the client room. And the book I just mentioned, I do recommend. It's very small, it's very concise, it is full of wisdom. And again, it's called Cycles in Medical Astrology, and you can buy it and also check out the rest of his work at KootenaySoundHealing.com, KOOTENAY soundhealing.com, and he's on the social media too. You can find him that way. But all in all, we realized that there's this great resonance. We have a nodal opposition. We got to talking about the Asclepion, which got me even more excited about the retreat that's about to happen in late September here in Colorado. By the way, there are a couple camping slots left, and so if you do want to come and dream with Chiron and be a part of something that is like an Asclepion, we do have a couple camping slots left. And so just reach out to me, Facebook, email. You can reach out to Sherry as well and make that happen. But anyways, KootenaySoundHealing.com. This is William Morris's website. His book is Cycles in Medical Astrology. I think you're going to love this podcast, and I will speak with you on the other side. William.
Hi, Adam.
I have all apologies for what actually was seemingly a void of course moon moment.
Is that what? I wasn't watching. I was in the middle of hosting a whole bunch of other events. Yes.
I usually not watching either, but I did notice.
That's funny. Yeah, I actually was doing a consultation. I do, regularly do health consultations as a practicing medical astrologer. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. And you look at VOC moon?
I don't consider void of course moon a lot because of what I call a tropical sidereal conundrum.
Ooh, tell us more. I think we know what you talk about, but
right. Right. So the zodiacs, right? Like in Indian astrology, which I studied with Mr. Rao and the Indian school there in Delhi, and spent a good amount of time studying it. We'll be presenting at the Vedic astrology in Sedona this fall, late in November. Of course, I think people by and large know that they use a zodiac that's based on constellations, whereas here in the West, in general, we tend to rely on a zodiac that's based on seasons. There are exceptions, of course, as always, on both sides. And so that variance is roughly 23 or 24 degrees and switches the zodiac. So if a moon's void of course in the West, it's not in the East. And so that becomes a culturally bound or a perspectively bound, rather, situation. And in my practice, I try to avoid that kind of information, notwithstanding the fact that we just had a very direct experience of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so when you're working with clients, you also avoid playing with the signs too much, because I know you're really focused on cycles.
Yeah, I'm big on cycles. I'll use signs. I'm trained in a lot of different schools of thought, but I spent the 90s working and following Olivia Barclay, and she is a part of that whole reemergence of classical or traditional styles. And I supported Project Hindsight and their reconstruction of the Greek documents. So, but Olivia is heavily into Lilly, these Renaissance astrologers. And so it's easy to say that I think that the heyday of medical astrological practice is really Renaissance period. And so when I'm doing that method, I'm going to use the same house system that they used, Regiomontanus, notwithstanding the fact that I'm living in Canada now, and these northern latitudes, those trisected house systems can really create some screwball charts.
Intercepted signs, etc.
I mean, like 2 and 3 signs intercepted, not just a regular old intercepted sign. It's like, okay, here's the reason why we use whole sign houses, or a good reason to do so.
Yes, I get it. A lot of listeners use whole sign. I know. I think it's true with Chris as well, if you're familiar.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Chris. And I actually converted to whole sign houses while studying with the Project Hindsight people back in the early 90s. And prior to that, my studies with different Vedic astrologers. And those cultures, I'll call those cultures, those are sub-astrological cultures with the bias towards whole sign houses. I think that the best course of action really comes from understanding how, when, why, and where to use a particular house system. Or if you're using, if you're trying to understand the inner workings of a practitioner, say William Salmon or Nicholas Culpeper, you really have to use the techniques that they used, even though in the northern latitudes it creates distinct problems, and I often abandon it and switch to whole sign houses. Now, Rob Hand, who had switched to whole sign houses early in the 90s, and was one of the people who had convinced me that it was a wise course of action, to my understanding, has returned to equal house systems, so that you have that ascendant degree proliferating throughout the houses and have a better, more sensitive timing feature with respect to that. And then there are some other astrologers influenced by the cosmobiologists, such as David Cochrane, who rely more on the midheaven as the most sensitive point from which to construct the equal house system.
It's also fascinating, isn't it?
It is. Well, I mean, if you're a nerd, I guess. It must be. We must be.
I mean, my journey went from porphyry to equal to whole sign. And once I found whole sign, it just felt like coming home. And I like things that work and that are easy. So I just kind of stick with it. That's
it does work. Yeah, it does work. It is easy. One of the problems is that it can skew your daytime, nighttime chart.
Yep.
And that's where the method probably should be adjusted for reality.
And are you talking about planets rising or setting that are still in the same sign and house?
That's correct. They get they'll get shunted into above the horizon or below the horizon.
Yep.
And so that's an example of when one might want to consider a slightly different path to the whole set. Yeah. What did I start? I think I must have started Placidus, and then I met Mary in March. So that brought me into Koch. And then I was hanging out with Vedic astrologers in the Los Angeles area, and that brought me, of course, to whole sign houses. What really converted me, though, I was doing Olivia Barclay's method, which is based on William Lilly. So that's going to be Regiomontanus. And then, but I felt that during those years, I would use her horary rules, but in the context of a sidereal whole sign house system. and I felt that was producing better results for me. But all of my research right now is on Renaissance, so I'm just pretty much try to stay Reggio unless the latitude just messes it up so badly I can't do it.
And what is it, around 40 degrees north and south that starts to contort the chart?
Yeah, that's about right. I mean,
That's about right.
But here in Canada, I mean, it's like I don't even pay attention. It's like, oh my God, I have no house cusp for these signs. I've got to have. I can't. Certain rules. Okay, when to use whole sign house or an equal house? If you're using perfections, you can't use a trisected house system where you're losing a house expression for each sign. The method doesn't work.
So you have to use equal or whole, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, William, you've been on a journey. How long has this journey with astrology been?
Well, I did my first reading in 1977.
Okay.
Was
Chiron found yet? Sorry to interrupt.
I didn't pay attention to Chiron. Okay. I was just following Dane Roger at that time, and reading everything by him that I could get my hands on, and I would encounter astrologers in the street. And then, to be honest, my early exposure to Marian March, she was kind of a bit of a fundamentalist, and said, if you can't read off of the basic materials of the chart, you really just got to get that together. And so I didn't start paying really attention to Chiron until much later, and hopefully Lee Lehman's not listening to me. Because as you know, that's not going to be part of the conversation for traditional methods.
No.
Yeah.
No. But he is a force, as you probably know, being
that I do.
As long as you have been. Okay, great. And so there's some semblance between you and I in that we've studied many different types of astrology. Like, people ask what kind of astrology I do, I just say astrology. There's nothing specific. I got started, I think, with evolutionary, and then it went into Vedic, and then through the show, I've talked to every astrologer on every branch of the tree, I imagine.
Oh, that's awesome. What a great experience that is. It
is. It really rounds out the perspective, and it creates tolerance. It creates, even more questions, because how can it all work?
Yeah. I have a friend of mine, Mark Jones, who you probably know of. I think for me, he is like the pinnacle of the evolutionary development, or the evolution of the evolutionary practice.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was just with him actually in Wales.
Oh, awesome!
I stay with him a couple of days. Yeah, he's a
send him my regards. Yeah, please.
When I go back, I will do that.
Okay, well, maybe I'll send him your regards. I think I'm due to speak to him soon.
Okay, yeah, definitely. We've been on this journey, and there's also this trifecta of interests as well that I think the listener of my show reached out to connect us, because he was like, well, there's the music thing, there's the dragon thing, there's the astrology, there's just so much that you and William need to talk about. And after reading a good majority of your book, I understand this now, and it's just really great to be talking with you.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, man. That's
cool. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, to bring it to a place maybe where we could call a start is the start for myself with astrology. Like, my initial interest was to use it as a diagnostic tool. I was never very good at pulse diagnosis. I was okay at like the CSOE method with 5-element Chinese medicine and some of the tricks that my Qigong teacher taught me, but I just never, it felt too subjective for me, taking pulse. And when I got into astrology, it became very apparent how helpful it could be for diagnostics. And then, the whole world opened, as you understand. Like, it's just like a forever study into this. And so maybe telling us your story of how the two of them greeted you in your life.
Oh, sure. Well, I was on the road playing music, and I'd been exposed to astrological folks and community in Dayton, Ohio when I was in high school. And then I left high school and left Ohio at the age of 19. And ended up in Los Angeles, where music was my chosen career at the time. So, but when I was on the road working in this little jazz trio situation, jazz blues kind of a thing, there's a lot of time in the afternoon, and I would just go to the bookstores and scour them looking for astrology books and reading those. And then the summer of 77, I was given a tarot deck and did a tarot reading, and I was also given a copy of the I Ching, and began to use that as an oracle and a way of seeing life and so forth. So somehow I got it together to the point where somebody was interested in having a reading from me and paying for it in fall of 77. And so that began the journey. I quickly came to a realization that road life as a musician wasn't how I wanted to be engaging in life. And so I ended up in Venice, California, and deeply embedded in a community of astrologers, many of whom were studying with Marianne March, and so I studied with her, but most of it was with Church of Light. And that was, I was learning remediation. But then during the same period, I was studying psychic healing. I had studied psychic healing in Lake Tahoe while working there, and the summer of 77 was the big epiphany change for me. And then I was pursuing that effort, and I encountered a woman named Eileen Nauman, who's published a book on medical astrology, and she said, if you want to be a medical astrologer, you have to study medicine. So I met Ron Teagarden, a guy who's focused on I learned acupressure, Jin Shin Do from him, and I learned Three Treasures herbal style. And so we could say Three Treasures style of herbalism is a way of conscious and spiritual development in relationship with the plant world. And so I started following his Taoist methods of cultivation using these agents, and my life really began to change in a fundamental way. And so at that point, I decided, I was well underway. I started working at Cedars-Sinai medical office towers, making homeopathic agents and dealing with managing the herbal dispensary and this whole thing. So as a result of that experience, I said, okay, that's it. I'm going to school. So I did my pre-med and went to Emperor's College. I was in their first graduating class in 86, 87. And immediately upon graduating, I started studying Western herbs. Of course, at the heart of the Western herbal tradition is the book which has been in longer publication than any other text than the Bible, which is Culpeper's Herbal. And Culpeper's Herbal assigns planets to the herbs. So I began studying from that point of view. During this whole time, while I'm in acupuncture school and doing all this, I'm still seeing clients. I'm still doing consultations. But the two disciplines hadn't formulated strongly enough to become a unified practice. And this is what I tell people all the time. When you're studying different systems, it's important to focus on mastering the system as it is prior to seeking the transdisciplinary perspective or the unity field expression of both or three or more disciplines at one time. So, but I just kept studying with different people. I found myself in Massachusetts, where I studied with Rob Gand and was really doggedly into the whole Project Hindsight. But I was also doing Ayurvedic programs, and because I really saw that in India, you have this living tradition of the astrological chart being used for particular forms of medical thought. Whereas up until Olivia, my impression was that the Western tradition was broken in its lineage transmission of such information. So the early 90s, I'm focused on the Ayurvedic practitioners, David Frawley doing his home study program in both Jyotish and Ayurveda. And while this is going on, I'm doing the New England School of Homeopathy's program, studying with Rob, Project Hindsight, blah, blah, blah. And Olivia Barclay is what turned me out. I started using her methods, leaving my computer running in the clinic. And so as a horary technique, I was able to see all kinds of stuff emergent as trends in the clinic that wasn't obvious to me as a practitioner, having studied. Now, by that point, I was well deep into my studies with Leon Hammer. I did a 7-year period of co-teaching with Leon, and
Down in Gainesville.
well, no, I actually introduced Leon to David Bowl, from whom he bought the school there in Gainesville.
Okay.
So this is predating Gainesville. I was actually teaching a 2-year herb course for the Florida Acupuncture Association, and I was studying with Leon. I was actually teaching Leon's methods. I was teaching it down there in Gainesville, and I brought Leon in to teach the students that I had prepared to study with him. And then eventually he developed a relationship with David, who purchased the school. And so that was later in the 90s. But so close to the time where he and I parted ways, because I had other work to do. I was focusing in on a reconstruction of the classical material. So I'm doing the same exercise in the Chinese medical form, Han Dynasty practices, doing the same thing with astrology, the Greek practices, trying to understand how those Greek methods are weaving into the Jyotish and the Vedic discipline. And but basically, my ongoing practice in the clinic is just running the machine using Renaissance techniques with a whole sign sidereal zodiac, and that was working great. Yeah, and then let's see. So at that point in '98, I took a job as a dean or on faculty at Emperor's College. I went back to my alma mater to teach there. I continued practicing and studying astrology and doing that work. So then pretty soon I'm doing a master's degree in medical education, developing doctoral programs, and I wanted to go do the Kepler College program, the one that Chris went through, and my buddy Scott Silverman went through that program. But I found myself on the deep end with running doctoral programs and taking them and so forth. My mother passed away at that time, and so I didn't pursue the formal education, and just kept the process up, studying with whomever I could and participating in the community wherever I could. And then I ended up moving to Austin, Texas, to serve as president of AOMA Graduate School of Integrative Medicine, where I took them to regional accreditation and pursued a PhD in transformative inquiry, where then People's Medical Publishing House approached me because I had done my PhD dissertation on pulse diagnosis, and I had been a senior faculty for Leon's community and the Dragon Rises community prior to the advent of the school. And then, so by that point, People's Medical Publishing House hired me to publish a book on pulse diagnosis, Leisure Gen Pulse Studies, an illustrated guide. It was that book. And now, when I moved to Texas, the board had lost my transcripts. So there was an extraordinary delay in my processing of my license there. And so I started using tuning forks. I had the Accutonics tuning forks at my disposal, and I looked at the forks and I'm going, oh my God, because in the Yellow Emperor's Classic, there's discussion about the planets in relationship to each of the 5 element points. So of course it's Saturn with the earth points, Jupiter with the wood points, Mars with the fire points, and here's a switch from the Western system. Venus is the water points, and Mercury is excuse me, I apologize. Mercury is the water points, and Venus is the metal points. So the 5 visible non-luminaries are each associated with one of the 5 element points on a meridian in that system. So I looked at it, I go, oh, well, having known this, it was easy for me to see exactly how I would use the forks based on pulse diagnosis and bringing in the planetary influences. So I started using the astrological chart that way. And maybe some people know, some people don't know that the organ clock of Chinese medicine is the, what do you call it, is the exact replication of the sun's movement through the houses in its diurnal motion. And so based on where a planet of the 5 visible planets, non-luminary, is located, it tells you exactly an elemental point on a particular channel. And so I worked with that method for a number of years, both as in medical astrology. Of course, we have 3 fundamental types of chart, right? There's the natal chart, which is the constitution. There's the decumbrature chart, which is the moment of the onset of a condition or an accident or trauma. And then there's the consultation chart. There are other charts that's used as well for purposes of building formulas, starting treatments, the electional system of astrology. But it tends to be less practical because people are usually wanting treatment for what they're suffering from in that moment rather than waiting to begin. But the techniques are valid and useful for the purposes of electing surgical procedures if one can get cooperation from a conventional medical scenario on that regard. And for that, I tend to use the methods of the physician William Salmon as opposed to any other particular methods. William Salmon had a long and illustrious career as a physician and as an astrologer and as an herbalist, and published significant texts on these matters. So that's kind of bringing us around to now. As a result of working through all of this, beginning to work with sound and so forth, somehow using the astrological chart as a staple of my clinical judgment from really, I'd say probably around the period of 1991. So that whole period up until now, it forms a really core feature of my clinical judgment. And this is what was important to say, I think, because when it comes to professionalism, I think that clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities is a very critical feature of that conversation. This conversation of being a medical astrologer. So for me, where I situate the astrological consideration is in the field of signs. So in medicine, we have signs and symptoms. So the symptoms is what the client reports to us, whereas the signs are maybe we're looking at the eyes or the face or doing other forms of physical examination, pulse diagnosis, looking at the tongue. Well, in that field of signs, one portion of it is the astrological chart. So I don't rely on the chart as the sole determiner of how I will judge, let's say, constitution with respect to the humors, hot, cold, moist, and dry in the Greek humors. That judgment is a composite of the observed phenomena in the clinical interaction in combination with due consideration for the astrological data. So what becomes then important is when they don't match, how, when, why, and where does that lack of matching take place? For instance, I had a client today for whom the Renaissance technique for understanding constitution showed a very damp constitution with hot and cold exactly equal. Now, and this is using the methods of William Lilly. But upon examination of the tongue, there's no clear determination of hot and cold. but taking the pulse is a very clear determination of cold. So we're able to discern, oh, wait a second, this is not a constitutional phenomenon. Her experience of this deep cold is an acquired scenario. And that takes a different form of treatment than when it's a constitutional scenario. Because what's part of the fundamental nature of the individual, then our strategies are always going to bring into question, am I dealing with strengthening the strengths, weakening the strengths, strengthening the weakness, weakening the weakness? And so that whole conversation of the early Greeks with respect to forms of medical care, with respect to what are called antipathies and sympathies. I have Lee Lehman to thank for bringing my attention to this particular perspective. I've always had an awareness, having practiced as a classical homeopath as well as an herbalist, of the heterodox nature of Chinese medicine, using sympathies and antipathies. But those two words as particulars relative to the Greek tradition were not in my awareness. So coming forward, I'm continuing to use the astrological, but more and more I'm using the sound specifically. Although I have to say, I did use sound as a therapeutic intervention before entering acupuncture, using the astrological consideration, what was ostensibly held out as Egyptian, but is very clearly a post-theosophical construct, with Aries being C sharp and then moving through by sign the black keys and then switching over to the white keys. I use that method to great effect with my clients, with my acupressure clients, and also just with clients sitting in the room meditating, or possibly using entheogenic materials to enhance the experience, to see, oh, here's a hard aspect. I'll play this hard aspect on the flute, and by and large, the person's developing anxiety, restlessness, and I play this harmonizing aspect, generally speaking, using the rules put forward by the Church of Light for astrological remediation. Then I find myself moving to British Columbia to be with my wife, who's an acutonic sound healer, and we've cultivated the acutonic system to a pretty high level, and I offer online courses using sound healing with the astrological. That course is going on currently, so the acutonic system, of course, is applying sound based on an average or a mathematical set of calculations that reduce the irregular orbits of a planet down to a regular number, and then multiply it into an audible frequency range. And this generates the frequencies that are used in that tradition, which is very different from Pythagorean and Neo-Pythagorean, Neoplatonic, really, because these people are all rolling around in the same school, essentially, of a low frequency Saturn. The faster the planet is, the higher the frequency, and these are using diatonic scale steps and so forth. With this method of the acutonics, there's I call it post-Keplerian view. So Kepler is noting the irregular orbits of the planets, and a man named Hans Cousteau, not Jacques, but Hans Cousteau discovered, it boils these orbital speeds down into, or multiplies them rather, into an audible frequency range. The sun's the exception. It's actually deconstructed down into a frequency range we can use. And these are applied to points, or regions of the body, or tissues, as the case may be. So I think I'll pause there for a second and see if there's anything you want to redirect. Or
So that's how you got started.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, where to enter from that? One, I feel that it would have really probably changed the course of my life if I would have went to Leon's school that you were talking about, and not AFIA. Because again, like I was saying, like I was never good at pulses, but like he's an expert. You obviously know a lot about it. And if I would have got good at pulse taking, I may have never tried to use astrology as a therapeutic tool
Oh,
or a diagnostic tool.
It's I say about destiny. How do you know it's destiny? Because it is, and so there you have it. There's no telling where you can end up rolling just from just a small turn in the path.
Exactly. Yeah, there's actually a quote in your book I really liked around fate. It was, "Free will is an enactment of fate." And you tell that story of Oedipus.
Yes. Oh, I did. Right. Yes.
It's perfect.
Love that.
Because I often think about that because there's like such a huge interest at the moment in astrological magic and talisman work and all of this. And your quote nails it. It's like, well, if you really enjoy doing all of that and meddling with fate, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's still going to lead you to the same destination is basically what you're saying.
Well, your destiny will be your destiny, and it's your destiny to meddle.
And
create it.
Yeah, it's all wonderful stuff.
The whole electional procedures of astrology kind of fall into that circle quite a bit. But we can't talk about medical astrology without discussing fate, or we can't really discuss astrology without due consideration of fate and how we're situated.
Precise.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Now, I think because there's a fascinating bit of synastry that you and I have is that our nodes are flipped. So my north node is 28, Gemini, your south node is that, and then we've got the connection, of course, with the galactic center with Sag. And I'm really like this area of the sky has always fascinated me, even before I knew astrology. The galactic center, Hunabku, Mula, as we know, as the nakshatra is there, and I'm just so curious because your work like is around this dragon idea and how it moves through the Chinese clock or how it moves through the organs of the body and cycles in relation as well to the nodes of the moon. And this is all quite new to me, but like I've been absorbing it because I already do so much work with the nodes of the moon and in a way medical astrology. And so I'm just so curious if you could describe how you work with this as far as medical astrology.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Well, just a quick retracement before we move into that, and that's that I became aware of the Galactic Center through the work of Philip Sedgwick, and I think as many did, and so that's a particular resonance, and that interweaving of the nodal axes. I think that evolutionary astrology has a significantly good hit on some very rich areas of exploration with respect to the path of destiny that we walk on this planet relative to the dragon's head and tail.
Yep.
So, but I guess where I've come to with this is just exciting me to no end. The song, but the first place I think to start with the conversation is the notion of the cycle, and so we have the cycles as Dane Rudger explicated in the cycle of the synodic cycle of the moon from new to full and back to new, for which there are acutonics or sound frequencies vibrating these conditions, and it's pretty far out. So when I see that going on, if I see a person coming in who's got a lunar cycle phenomena going on, I'm pulling out moon forks. And if they've got diurnal cycle issues, then I'm pulling out what's called an Earth Day fork, or the frequency for the diurnal motion from, as the Earth turns and goes back to meet that point in the sky where it was when it started the previous day, just slightly adjusted. And then, of course, the annual cycles. Now, of course, the nodal cycle is 18.4, 5, or 6, depending years. What's fascinating to me is I was the Kepler conferences down in Florida. I was presenting on on this notion of cycles and how medical research actually demonstrates efficacy of astrology for annual, monthly, and diurnal rhythms. But I came across this one study that showed this 18.5-year cycle of blooming of marsh insects, and in particular mosquitoes. So if we look at mosquitoes as a vector for transmission of bloodborne and latent pathogens, then, I mean, holy cow, because I've been working with the nodal axis as a significator for latent pathogens for, I don't know, 15 years or 20 years now. And it seems to hold up when the nodal axis is conjunct the ruler of the sixth in a consultation or a decumbrature chart. It's a pretty compelling argument for me to go searching out for where latent pathogens are hidden and using appropriate techniques for resolving them. In particular for tonic herbs, to go to the region with herbs that open the surface in order to release them. It's a specific technique I use from a physician about the 1600s named Liu Baoyi, if I'm correct on that time frame. Anyway, so...
Can I ask a clarifying question real quick?
Yeah. Oh, please.
So
Yeah. Feel free to interrupt anytime.
With the mosquito connection, what you found was there's something with an 18.5-year cycle around latency with bloodborne diseases with mosquitoes?
Well, the research showed that there was an 18.5-year cycle of bloom of the insect population in the marshes.
Okay.
So what this is I think that there's great fruit for doing research in weather conditions relative to health conditions, rather relative to astrological conditions.
Because we're dealing with the serocycle as well, like eclipse cycles.
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Indeed.
And just to add this real quick, and then you can continue.
Cool.
I have used mosquitoes as a metaphor before when talking about the nodes, because if you think about the symbols, K2 holds water, right? And the mosquitoes will definitely do their thing in that pot full of water outside. And then when they come out, they're just hungry, right? They got to eat and they got to do their thing and die. And like the nature, especially of Rahu Ketu in that sense, is really fascinating that you brought that up.
So it's maybe that has something to do with our nodal axial interpolation. But
we discovered that mosquitoes are the true dragon.
Maybe, I don't know. So okay, so back to it. I mean, we have dragon myths in all cultures, right? I mean, I have not been able to find a culture which doesn't have some form of a dragon mythos in its pre-modern construct. Just different moods about it, right? I mean, I was fascinated with this stuff in high school, the Arthurian legends and Archangel Michael's slaying of the dragon. And in the West, right, it's the dragon is essentially this shroud over material nature that we must overcome, much like Maya is to the Indians, is this illusion. Whereas over in China, right, these dragons are symbols of magical and mystical powers.
Elemental as well, right?
Yes, elemental. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, and different types of dragons relative to different elements. Yep. Now, so this mythos is going on, and then there's of course the Kundalini. So in the Vedic lore. And more particularly a little bit later, Ayurvedic lore, there's discussion of, and it's a latter-day scenario, this discussion of the relationship between chakras and the planets. And so this becomes an argument in part for the traditional rulerships of the signs, right? Where the third eye is where the lights are present, and then in a movement from faster to slower moving, right? So Mercury takes on the throat chakra, and so this is going to be Mercury and Gemini and Virgo, right? And then Venus is in the heart chakra, and so this is very different than the post-theosophical movement assignment of meaning to chakras. So I'm going for the earliest traditions expression of these forms of thought, because I think that there's been a longer critical dialogue in the development of the use of those tools than if we go for something that's kind of postmodern and person's just made it up based on some experiences or some observations. It's not that that latter doesn't have value. There may be some insight, but the rigors of debate have yet to be employed in those scenarios. So back to the assignments at hand. It goes. So from Venus then to Mars at the third chakra, at the power center, Jupiter at the second chakra, and Saturn at the root chakra relative to survival. And so that's how they do it in India. So that's the way I use it in my book. And then I'm going to look at the nodal axis of the moon as the way of casting that. So the nodal axis of the moon is now becoming not just a temporal phenomenon from past to future, but an anatomical basis for judgment. And I'll say this, I've got over 40 years of practicing using medicine and astrology together in some form or another. And I have used, of course, which is the basis of medical practice, the assignment of signs and houses in the traditional medicine or in the traditional astrology. The notion of rulership over a part of the body is conflated for both sign and house, whereas unlike in the traditional astrological systems, as a general concept, houses have a very different meaning than signs. Very different than, of course, the postmodern alphabets, the astrological alphabet soup that came up out of the Los Angeles terrain with Zip Dobbins in the 70s. This is, as we discovered in most traditional lore, the distinction of signs and houses are very different, with the exception of medicine, where in their rulership of anatomy, they are conflated. But I'll say this, in my experience of assigning anatomy as what I call, here we go, it's a fractalating, whole self-replicating system.
I follow.
Okay. This fractalating, self-replicating system is going to be a situation where that nodal axis of the moon is at the top, the head of the north node is the third eye, and the south node is the root chakra. And then planets in the chart are compacted or compressed into a linear, a two-dimensional frame where you can see what planets are resting within each chakras. So we have the ideal that comes from India, going from slower moving planet to faster moving planet up through the chakras, from the root, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, and then the sun and moon in the third eye. And you see all medical texts will say that the lights are governing the eyes. And then past this is of course, the constellational field into the crown chakra. And so this bodily segment of the chakra system can then, in the fractalating whole self-replicating systems, can then be transferred on to any long bone in the body for purposes of applying therapeutic agents, whether it's sound tools or acupuncture needles or or moxibustion, burning thing, cutting, burning, bleeding, gemstone placement, crystal placement, sound placement, whatever the form of engaging with the physical terrain is going to be, the astrological chart almost invariably provides an awareness of where the problems will be. Take, for instance, JFK, John Kennedy, was an example I used in the book. And you can see this cluster around his first and second chakra, matching part of his lifestyle choices, but also an area where much of his physical maladies derived of.
Real quick, when you say a cluster around his first and second chakra, are you looking at Saturn and Jupiter in that sense, or I'm trying to follow?
No. You're looking at what planets are actually present there.
And how do you do that with the chart?
Okay, so you turn the wheel, as we're all want to do. We turn the wheel for different reasons. This one is to get a vertical hit on where planets are resting. So the north node is at the top and the south node is at the bottom. So if a planet is within 30 degrees either side, so it's 30 degrees segments bilaterally.
Yep.
It gets collapsed to the midline. So if it's within 30 degrees of the south node, either going clockwise or counterclockwise, or we could say either going diurnal motion or zodiacal motion. Yeah, is actually the way it's said.
So in your own chart, because you have Saturn, the sign over from your north node, Saturn lives in your throat?
Exactly.
Got it. Very interesting model, William.
Oh, yeah.
And then Mars lives in your root?
Exactly.
And Jupiter?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I get it.
Yeah. It's actually quite simple.
It is simple.
Yeah. And so Saturn's right there in the throat region. So it's not just the chakra, right? It's going to be any tissues in that area can be affected. So I have some cervical bone tissue, Saturn damage as a result of head injuries in my youth and so forth. So these things they hold up pretty well. I mean, better in many ways, better than the traditional rulerships, where, let's say, for a consultation chart, I'm going to look at the ruler of the sixth house and see where it's placed and the humoral influences and so forth.
So I'm pretty sure everyone listening is confused right now. So let's use another example.
Let's back up. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We can use me as an example. So my south node's in Sag.
Okay, I've got it right here. 25 Sag, 10 minutes, and only 3 degrees and 22 minutes away is Neptune.
Yeah, so we got Neptune, and then also Jupiter and Uranus are also in Sag. And so the assumption with this model that you're talking about is those three planets are in or around the tissues of the root.
That's correct. The root chakra is going to be a focal point for you.
Yep.
In your life, thematically, in terms of the materials of the root chakra, but also in terms of that part of your body. So then we start asking questions about that part of the body, particularly with Uranus there. One would expect that there might have been some type of traumatic incident to the tissues in that region.
The worst one of my life.
Oh,
actually.
Really?
Yeah. It was like the most minor accident that I think I've ever had, but it was the most painful. I used to really BMX when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And the end of the handlebars like jammed in like the area like between my belly button and my genitals.
Gotcha.
And went deep, like really, really deep. And I've never felt pain like that before. And it took a long time to recover from it. But there is an example, and I would wonder, like looking back to that, because I'm sure you see the overlap, right, of transits that happen.
Oh yeah,
to those areas when there's decumbenture.
Sure, we certainly want the chart for that event.
Yeah, I should
Yeah.
get
That's a really good chart because you can develop treatments off of it, and we'll discuss in a little bit maybe some more sophisticated approaches to treatment. But looking at Jupiter there, you see the 5 visible planets are going to govern the 5 tissues, right?
Yep.
So Jupiter's governing the tendons, while Saturn's governing the bones. Mars is the vascular system in this instance, not in the traditional European method. This is Chinese application of Chinese thought. Venus is going to be ruling the skin and so forth.
And that's because she's metal in that system. You're talking about
exactly.
how she's lungs and
that's right. And exactly.
Okay.
So Jupiter's always a tendon, always liver in any culture, and so probably there was some damage to the connective tissues as well. Also, one would expect. This is going off the natal. We can't discern a lot off of the natal, the decumbrature. So Nicholas Culpeper had very little patience for these doctors he called piss doctors. And so these are the people where somebody for the patient would bring the doctor a container of their urine, and then he would cast the chart and look at the chart on its own, but also based on the presentation of particulate in the urinary content. It's actually a really good method where you look at the chart over the top of the container of the urine. And I mean, I don't do it a lot, but I find it fascinating. And but he had little patience for that. Culpeper relied mostly on the decumbrature, and bearing in mind that people during that era, really, it was uncommon to have an accurate birth time. We didn't have clocks until the advent of the railroad. So the ability to get an accurate birth time was, even for the privileged royal class, was somewhat questionable.
Let's revisit something real quick. These piss doctors. You said reading the chart through the urine, so you would actually look at the chart through the glass of pee. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, you kind of hold the chart up over it, and then you can put our particulate in the urine into different houses.
It's like tea reading.
It's exactly. You got it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm gonna get into that. Everyone listening, I'm open for. I need to get my wings with this one. I need at least 100 sessions. Just kidding. So this is fascinating.
Well, that's a worthy study. It's
for sure.
Scientific. This is a scientific approach to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good for you. I support it.
Yeah, way better than drinking your urine. Never got into that.
I thought. Okay, good. Although I did prescribe drinking urine to a man who had was having kidney failure and had no funds for pursuing conventional treatment, and he healed himself of the kidney disease.
Oh, that's so good.
So I mean, it's common in India. That method, and I know
definitely common in hippie circles too.
Oh, right. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of, well, not anymore, but actually when I was at acupuncture school, there was a handful of my fellow students that were pee drinkers.
Mm-hmm. Well, Culpeper's hit on the whole thing was just partially it's socio-political, right? The privileged medical class, he left medical school to become a pharmacist and work on the outskirts of London, providing services to the underprivileged. So his work was as much a socio-political statement as it was an act of care.
I never knew that. That's a great bit of history.
Yeah.
Let's actually, where I want to go with this next one, because I'm sure you have something wonderful to say about it, is to trace the lineage back to, let's just say, Asclepius.
Oh.
And I'm reading this wonderful book at the moment. You might be familiar with it. It's called The Art of Dream Healing by Edward Tick. No?
So it's that. I'm not familiar with this book, and it reminds me of the temples of Asclepius, though.
The whole book's about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he's a PhD guy, and he works mainly with trauma victims and a lot of vets. And the book is interesting. Like he's going to all the different Asclepions throughout the Mediterranean, like the big ones like Epidaurus and the one in Kos, etc., and retelling the story. And it's kind of a great history lesson of the Asclepion, even how it infiltrated Rome and all of these bits of history that I never knew about it. But what also seems to be a little foggy is what kinds of botanical uses they had, right? There was fasting,
right.
there was the dreaming, there was the like your therapist that would help you understand and see if you could translate like the appearance of Asclepius and his many forms in the dreams. And that's lots of different ways of going about the healing, but like what plants were used. And you mentioned something that pricked my ear about like, oh, if an entheogenic method is needed, then so I'm curious about like what you think may have been used in those dream incubators.
Okay, the dream incubator. Of course, they're consuming some form of an entheogen. We're not confident that we know exactly what that material is,
right?
Or at least I'm not, and I haven't come across anyone who's is. I mean, sometimes people will come across confident, in particular in the realm of mushrooms. Psilocybin mushrooms have been put forward as the basis for many of these endeavors. But what also takes place in those temples is that while the people are in the dream time, they're releasing serpents into the space.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a particularly intense idea to my mind, to be sleeping on entheogens and waking up with serpents all through the room that's like, wow, that's pretty darn intense.
Yeah.
But I view myself as a latter day expression of that cult, and some fancies in my mind, and I do that, having Mercury opposite Neptune as the tightest orbed hard aspect in my flat nativity. I can have a pretty fanciful dream time. And so I imagine myself in that realm, but I don't think it was ayahuasca.
Nope.
There's no evidence. But down through China, we see different materials used from in the alchemical traditions, right? Mercuric sulfide, arsenic sulfide. These materials are used, and they can be psychotropic. So we don't know if there was a mineral compound or a plant compound that's activating these higher mind centers for purposes of awakening.
Yeah, there is a lot of speculation, isn't there? But yet we know, it seems at this point, what was used in Eleusis. Right? That it was.
What do you have for that? Yeah.
Well, there's a wonderful book called The Road of Eleusis that Carl Rook, Albert Hoffman, and Gordon A. Wasson wrote together. Mm-hmm. And it seems it's pretty, I think, accepted in academia at this point that it was some sort of admixture of plants and ergot as well. That was in the Kaikion.
Of course.
And ergot has LSA in it. It's the fungus that grows off of rye and wheat. And then you can synthesize LSD from that.
Well, that would make sense. That's a pretty clean approach.
You need to know how. I mean, that's also, but it can poison you. You need to know how to to make it right. I mean, we're talking about Asclepius. He had Chiron as a teacher. I think they knew how to get out the harmful alkaloids from these plants.
Well, and you find it's a cultural phenomenon where an indigenous culture will have a direct knowledge of how to use a plant safely, whereas somebody outside that culture doesn't have that knowledge. And
like Omni Muscaria, speaking of drinking pee.
Oh, right, yeah.
There's that one. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Well, jolly old Saint Nick found it to be good enough. So can we. So can we.
If we were closer to Christmas, William, we could go into that right now. But for now, let's keep it to dragons and Shiva's body. Yeah. This is such a great topic. I just love it. And so you said that you're speaking at this Vedic conference in Sedona soon?
That's correct.
Tell us about that. Maybe some of the listeners want to go.
Oh, well, it's a conference at the end of November in Sedona. Let's see. It's called the Vedic Astrology Conference.
Does David Fowley?
He will not be there to my knowledge.
Okay.
Vedic Astrology. Let's see if I put in Sedona here. I'll search it up here.
Yeah, that's
Sedona Vedic Astrology Conference. Imagine that. Anyway, Dennis Harness is the one who puts it on.
Okay, the Naksatra's book that I love so much.
And Dennis is just amazing and such a wonderful person to be with. I decided to go there. Probably rent a room with my buddy Scott Silverman. And yeah, now there's going to be some fantastic lectures. Alan Anand is going to be presenting on his research, and that'll be fantastic. And so it's enjoyable. Kenneth Miller will be there presenting. Who's I don't know if y'all know, he's president of Kepler College at the moment. Mm-hmm. Kamala Sutton will be there. But so Alan Anand is going to be speaking on the Kalasarpa Yoga, so that's particularly interesting. And so Kalasarpa Yoga, for those that don't know, is when all planets are placed on one side of the nodal axis or the other, and it can contribute to some fairly intense life experiences for these natives. So,
yeah, I remember learning about that. I don't see it often. It's not the most common.
Yeah. It's not terribly common, but Alan's got like hundreds of cases. It's just amazing. Great. So yeah, he's going to be well worth checking out. Yeah.
And for everyone, don't just go searching for Kalasarpa in your chart and get all worried. It's more complicated than that.
That's right. There are a number of rules for the whole process. Mm-hmm. But it brings me back to my experience of Project Hindsight, in particular of Robert Schmidt, recently deceased this last year. Yeah. So Robert was really onto this concept of the same and the other for the Greeks. And the same and the other has to do with zodiacal or diurnal motion of planets. So, of course, the diurnal motion is going to be, as you look at a chart, it'll be a clockwise motion as the Earth's turning, and then the zodiacal motion will be a counterclockwise motion. That counterclockwise motion is essentially considered to be the same, while the other, or the changingness of life, is, of course, in the diurnal rhythms. So what I do in my approach to the nodal axis when I'm writing herbal formulas is use the herbal formula to move the vitality, the vital life force, in a particular direction. And it depends on whether I'm focusing diurnally into the concerns of daily life, or if I'm focusing in terms of the zodiacal motion. Now, there's a third layer to this, and we use this in sound healing, and it is the precession of the equinox. The precession of the equinox is also going to be a clockwise motion. It moves along the same pathway as diurnal motion. And so we're looking at large relationship of an individual soul to the rise and fall of civilizations. This that movement, that cycle, also has a frequency which can be rendered into the audible frequency range and used in the context of treatment. So, but generally speaking, when it comes to building an herbal formula or a sound treatment relative to, let's say, the soul's destiny as it walks on this path, I'm going to be looking at using up-bearing and down-bearing functions relative to the nodal axis and counterclockwise or zodiacal motion. So if I've got a cluster down on the right-hand side of the nodal axis, I'm going to be using some up-bearing. And so in terms of acupuncture channels, that means I'm going to be using yin channels. If it's on the right side of the nodal axis, it's from the client's perspective, not from my perspective as the practitioner, but rather as the client faces their chart, the nodal axis is turned, so the north is above and the south is below. And by the way, I take exception to Robert Jansky's construction of this, which was the opposite. He put the south node at the head and the north node at the tail. And it had to do with some kind of ideas about birth. But having worked with this in the clinic for the last 40 years with Robert's writing in mind, part of that time, I've come to the conclusions that I have. And
so just clarity around that is that you put, for the diagnostic chart, the north node at the top of the chart, is it conjunct the midheaven?
Well, we turn it so that it's above. Yeah.
Okay, so the midheaven then doesn't remain up there. It says somewhere else.
No, midheaven's not a point of consideration in this matter.
Okay, got it.
It moves too fast. I need techniques where I can have reliable methods that are not dependent on an accurate birth time. So an 18.5-year cycle of the nodal axis gives me that. And so the biggest area of mistake that I can have in that context is the speed of the moon.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And like one question around this that I wanted to ask earlier is how connected is this to, say, the motion of pneuma or chi through the Ida and the Pingala nadis? Okay.
So it's directly related. But it's, oh God, let's see how to say this. They are kind of like points of stagnation, where the movement of chi in the Ida and Pingala up and down the spine, and the path of the dragon, as it were, and rising of the Kundalini. If a person has Saturn, let's say Saturn's particularly strong, or whatever, it's just, Saturn's all in a cluster bound up with Mars and Mercury and the Moon at the diaphragm. So at the bendings where they're all square the nodal axis. For sure, the person's diaphragm will be tense, and we'll have to use treatments that are going to open the diaphragm. And I say for sure because since I've been doing this method, I've never seen it not be so. And so I'm only one person doing it, but still, I've had a lot of clients who I've observed under these circumstances. Now, so that's going to place it at roughly somewhere between the third and fourth chakra as to where the blockage is, and they will invariably have that. Or let's put Saturn clustered with a couple other planets into the heart chakra. They got Saturn and Jupiter. There's this flip-flop between opening and closing of the heart chakra as the movement of chi or golly. There's distortions in its trajectory in the zones where these planets are clustered. And so when there's a stellium, the stagnations and clustering tend to be greater. Furthermore, the symptom presentation in the corresponding chakra and its related tissues and organs are also tend to be more present in the native's awareness as problems or something to overcome.
I get it. I just hope my listeners do too.
It's it's something that's so much easier to do with the visual images. And
yes,
yeah. It's in the book. It's in my book, Cycles in Medical Astrology.
Yep.
Those pictures are in there, and then of course I also teach a course on it where people get guidance as to the actual application of the methods. I can,
Where do they find that?
Well, they can go to Kootenai Sound Healing Center. Kootenai is spelled Kootenay.
Okay.
I live here on Kootenai Lake, a very small, isolated town in the center of British Columbia, above Idaho, and we have a healing temple, a sound healing temple here. Classrooms here, but I also do it online. So what I've done, though, is the medical astrology coursework that I teach has been divided. I'm doing acusystems and sound healing as a separate phenomena than the herbal / nutritional concepts, because the folks who are either competent in or choose to pursue course of study in one method may not the other. So the occasional person who has interest in both can just do both. Yeah. We usually start it from scratch and build it right on up into sophisticated techniques, such as using number vibrational charts, as in David Hamlin's work, or in particular David Cochran. David Cochran's really brought around this whole vibrational astrology thing, which is a post-cosmobiological view. I'm not sure how much readers are familiar with the Uranian astrology movement and the cosmobiological movement. That was an attempt to scientize astrology, and uses midpoint structures and vibrational charts, what the Hindus call the amshas, but there can be different ways of calculating them. There are more simple mathematical formulas for creating a 9 vibrational chart in the West than the East, oftentimes, and particularly for the decan, the Drekana, or what's called the Drekana in the Amsha system, the 10th harmonic, is calculated differently. But I use, in particular, I've been using as of late for health charts. We're going to use the 6th harmonic, the 8th harmonic, just as in the houses, the 6th and the 8th houses for understanding acute and chronic disease, and then the 1st house for understanding the constitution. Then in the vibrational system in India, they use 6th harmonic, 8th harmonic, but also the 27th harmonic. And this, you able to hear me still?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, good. Yeah, it came unplugged. The 27th harmonic is super powerful for healing, and it's what I'll often use. Just a 27th harmonic. Look for the tightest midpoint structure in that chart, and those will be the 2 tuning forks that I'm going to use. The 2 planetary tuning forks, and they get applied to the body according to the chakra and the. So what I've discovered finally is a tool, the nodal axis of the moon, as a constant across the vibrational charts, across the harmonic charts, because if you have an inaccurate birth time, those harmonic charts are all screwed up. They're not reliable when you get into the upper harmonics. So if we have a slow moving point, 18.5 years. Now all of a sudden we've got a constant that we can have very reliable results with very particular expressions at the level of the chakras. And so using a planetary frequency in a given chakra, we can activate a harmonic chart in a very concrete way.
I love how the dragon's been educating you, William. Throughout your life, I feel like my Rahu is just nibbling at the tail of everything that you're saying. There's so much here.
Yeah, and I apologize to any learners if some of this doesn't sound clear or understandable. But it is, if you read the book over and over, you can actually get this. And if you take the course, of course, you can actually get it. But of course, to express these kinds of constructs verbally in this kind of environment, and it can be rather difficult to grasp in a way that you can just go out and do it tomorrow.
That's right.
Yeah.
Got to put in some work. That's what most things. That's right. Read the book. Yeah. Reach out to William maybe for consultation. Do you do them online? Because I do. Yeah, I do consult. Like, for instance, people in the sound healing community will consult with me to find out their most powerful vibrational chart
select forks on that basis and use it as a tool for enlightenment practices.
Okay.
Use the 27th harmonic for healing purposes. And so, yeah, I do. I am available that way. Also, we do classes. In this coming October, we've got classes going on here live at the Kootenai Sound Healing Center in British Columbia.
I want to come visit someday.
Oh, you're totally welcome. It's pretty amazing. We've got facilities where people can stay, and
Hopefully,
yeah, we do, and we also have this temple. Let's see. Oh, I actually have dates here. My wife Teresa just gave me these. October 19th to the 21st, we do level 1 actonics. That's where we deal with learning about the precession. The precession of the equinox, the frequencies for that, lunar, solar, annual, diurnal motion frequencies are all learned in their application. Then October 23rd through the 25th, we do level 2, where people learn more shamanistic approaches to sound healing. And we use the chart. Mm-hmm. Yeah, oddly enough.
something like an Asclepion's happening up there in British Columbia.
Oh, yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. Oh, so here's the scoop. Here's what we do. We'll do what's called a local space, right? And we'll set up the ritual space or the sound healing environment so that we have gongs, chimes, forks that are low, mid, and high. So we have all these octaval expressions of any given planetary frequency. We'll take the gongs for each planet and set them around the room based on a local space. So we take the astrological chart and lay it down. And then according to where the planets are in the sky, it's rendered down onto the circle of the space in which we're performing ritual, and those gongs are placed. And then we'll do other live instruments along with those frequencies as well. We have some other folks doing very advanced forms of breathing work. They've been exposed to every breathing release technique known in the Western world, and they have a very sophisticated approach to creating safety for people to do that breathing work while the sound frequencies that are designed to resonate with the skies at that moment. So I call it a resonant theurgy, that particular practice.
Do people levitate at these events?
Well, I think actually we've had people say they thought they did. I never saw it. But
Does Hermes Trismegistus show up?
Sure, we get
fully robed.
We get visitations. We do. There are.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Love it.
Because I have a strong interest in the whole Western mystery tradition and those practices. So I use them intrinsic to as an internal process to the work I'm doing, as well as using a physical agent such as a sound generating device. Yeah.
Oh, William, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. All that you're into is just, I mean, it's what I'm so into, and I just love talking to people like yourself and realizing that, like, oh, yeah, here's another universe that just opened up. An entire universe.
Well, I'm so grateful for your interest and pursuit, creating a conversation whereby we can explore some of these thoughts. It's been really a tremendous privilege to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you were willing to be flexible with me as well. I know we had that first time, and I was just getting back here to Colorado, and then today, whatever that was about, it's perfect because we still got to chat today.
That's right. Well, you know my opinion about destiny, so there we have it.
Yeah, that's it. This was destined to happen. Hopefully, everyone that listened to it, scratching their head too hard or searching for Kalasarpa Yuga, or not Yuga.
Kalasarpa Yoga.
Yoga, yeah, not Yuga. Yuga's the big time cycles. I know this.
Yeah. So the yoga is right. It's just the clustering all the planets on one side of the nodal axis, and it creates some intensity in the life of the native, and those people know. You'll say, this and this and this. So the particulars, of course, are individual, But I'm going to be interested in hearing what Alan Anand has to say about that down there in Sedona. My presentation will, of course, be mostly on the medical research that confirms the basic cycles of the day, month, year as a feature in medical concerns, and then a little bit on this work from Cycles in Medical Astrology.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
If I was still stateside, I'd be coming. I sure would.
Where will you be?
I'm off to England.
Oh, nice. Oh, right. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, so I'll be there. But I wish you the best with it and everything else, William.
Thank you.
It really has been a true pleasure talking with you.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I look forward to hearing from you again.
It will happen.
All right, Adam.
Have a beautiful night.
Okay, you too, man. Thanks. Night.
And there you have it. William Morris and I talking about medical astrology. How mosquitoes might relate to the nodes of the moon. Ugh, I hope not. But it is a scaly and fresh model of health and latent energies that I think he presents, and I've been playing around with it a lot. I've been looking at my own chart. I've been testing it out with clients ever since he and I chatted. There's something to it. And again, Cycles of Medical Astrology is his book, and Kootenai Sound Healing is his site. So KOOTENAY soundhealing.com to check out more of what he's up to up there in British Columbia. And yeah, I just want to thank you again, William, if you're listening to this, for coming on. It was a true pleasure. Quick reminder, the retreat. Yes, we do have a couple camping spots left. Dreaming with Chiron, last weekend of September. You can email me. You can go to my site or Sherry's site at thealchemyofartemis.com and read more about it and reach out to either of us. And it's a great discount too if you end up wanting to camp. A couple news bulletins, I suppose. I'm about to be on the next Astrology Hub podcast. We talked about synodic cycles and what's the purpose of life. And that'll be posted. It was great to talk to Amanda today. And I recently was on another podcast about entrepreneurship called the Member Mouse podcast. If you want to listen to that one, it just, I guess, Google Member Mouse or find it on your podcast app. I also shared it in my newsletter and on social media. So yeah, speaking of plug-in stuff, I mean, this podcast is brought to you by Solar Fire. If you want to like flip the wheel around and see Rahu at the top of the chart and Ketu at the bottom of the chart and try to contemplate William's methods, Solar Fire is definitely a good way of doing that. If you go to elabe.com and use promo code SOMA, you will get 15% off of Solar Fire. And the podcast is also brought to you by Four Sigmatic. I would think, I suppose, that some of these mushrooms were involved with the Asclepion, or at least the ritual rites of Eleusis, like cordyceps or reishi or lion's mane or some of these other great ones. And Four Sigmatic has incredibly high quality medicinal mushrooms in drinkable form, in pill form, in coffee form, tea form, body product form, so many different forms. And if you use Soma on their site, you get 10% off of any of their products. So Solar Fire and Four Sigmatic, you both use the same promo code and you get these great discounts. I'm going to leave you now with a song by the Olympians. I didn't know what to use in this podcast. Like, I was trying to think, like, what's the great song that captures this podcast? And what I often do is put the Holes to Heavens playlist that's on Spotify on shuffle. Everybody is welcome to this playlist, by the way. And I put it on shuffle, and the first song that came on was the Olympians, Sagittarius by Moonlight. I'm like, well, William's a jazz musician, and his north node's in Sag, right on my south node, and so it's kind of like an Ouroboros situation. And I thought, well, this is a beautiful song. I think it relates. And so if you're not privy to the Olympians, here are the Olympians. It's a song called Sag by Moonlight. And again, thank you, William. Thank you, everybody else, for listening. Be well, be kind. I'll be talking with you next with my dearest of friends, Alec. with really more medical astrology, to be honest. That's what we're going to be talking about. And so I'll talk with all of you at the end of the month, and be well, be kind. Until then, ciao.